Saudi Arabia is facing renewed global criticism after sentencing one of its most prominent women's rights activists to nearly 6 years in prison.
The lives of Saudi women have long been shaped by some of the strictest rules and regulations in the modern world. Many of the challenges they face are completely unheard of by most people. Brace yourself as we count down the 10 most shocking restrictions still faced by women in Saudi Arabia. Here are the 10 things Saudi women do not want you to know. Number 10. Male guardianship system. It's hard to imagine what life is like when you need permission for basic things like traveling, getting married, or even accessing health care. For many women in Saudi Arabia, this isn't just an idea. It's a reality shaped by the male guardianship system. This system places enormous control over their lives, and while there have been some reforms, the grip of male guardianship remains strong. The male guardianship system in Saudi Arabia is one of the strictest forms of control over women anywhere in the world. Women are required to get approval from a male guardian, whether it's their father, husband, or even their son, for many decisions. Without a guardian's consent, a woman might not be able to travel or even access health care. This restricts their independence and can make them feel as though they have less control over their own lives. Recent reforms have offered some hope. Since 2019, Saudi women can now travel without needing a male guardian's permission and apply for their passports. These were significant changes, especially in a country where women were not even allowed to drive until 2018. But the truth is, many aspects of daily life are still under the shadow of male guardianship. For instance, women still need a guardian's approval to leave prison or shelters for domestic abuse survivors. Additionally, Saudi women cannot pass on their citizenship to their children, a right that men have without restrictions. One of the most challenging aspects of this system is how it has entrenched itself into the legal framework of Saudi Arabia. In 2022, the personal status law further solidified many aspects of male guardianship into law. Although this law did bring some equality between spouses, it reinforced the male guardian's authority. For example, wives are legally required to obey their husbands. This has raised concerns, as it can put women in vulnerable situations, especially in cases of abuse, where legal protection can be limited. Many human rights organizations and activists have condemned this system for encouraging gender-based violence. Saudi women's rights activists have fought hard against male guardianship, but often at a high cost. Lujan Al-Hathlul is one of the most prominent figures in this battle. She has been fighting for women's rights, including the right to drive and the end of guardianship. However, her activism led to her arrest in 2018, and she has become a symbol of the ongoing struggle for equality in Saudi Arabia. The international community has taken notice as well. Human rights groups and organizations like the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women have urged Saudi Arabia to fully dismantle the guardianship system. Even with these reforms and the increasing global pressure, the road ahead remains long. Deep-rooted discrimination continues to affect the lives of many Saudi women. Despite their legal right to travel without permission, countless women still report being blocked from accessing jobs, healthcare, or even the freedom to move freely because of the restrictions imposed by male guardians. Number 9. Marrying without consent. In Saudi Arabia, a woman's ability to marry without family approval is severely restricted. Marriage decisions, especially for women, are often dictated by their family's wishes. If a woman's family disapproves of her choice, the marriage simply does not happen. This reflects the deeply entrenched cultural norms where family honor is placed above individual choice, and women's autonomy is significantly limited. Recent reforms in Saudi Arabia have brought some improvements to women's rights, but they remain far from equal to men. For example, under the new personal status law, a woman must still obtain the consent of her male guardian, whether it is her father, brother, or another male relative, for the marriage to be legally recognized. This codified requirement is a major obstacle for many women who wish to marry someone their families disapprove of, leaving them trapped between family expectations and their personal desires. Divorce, on the other hand, is even more difficult. While men in Saudi Arabia have the right to divorce their wives without condition, women face legal, financial, and societal barriers. A woman can only seek a divorce under specific circumstances, such as mistreatment or failure of the husband to meet his obligations. Even then, she must often prove this in court, a lengthy and costly process. In cases where a woman pursues a khula divorce, she is required to repay her dowry in exchange for her freedom, placing yet another burden on her. If a woman does manage to secure a divorce, her challenges do not end there. Although a mother may retain custody of her children in some cases, the father remains the legal guardian and retains control over important decisions, including matters like travel or education. This imbalance of power further limits women's autonomy even after their marriage has ended. For many women, the challenges of marriage and divorce in Saudi Arabia are part of a system where men still hold most of the power over women's lives. While Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has introduced reforms like the personal status law, which are said to promote equality, these changes don't go far enough. Saudi women, particularly those who seek a divorce from abusive or unhappy marriages, often find themselves in an extremely vulnerable position. The courts frequently prioritize family reconciliation over the woman's well-being, meaning that a woman may be forced to remain in a harmful relationship until she can meet the stringent conditions for divorce. Even if she succeeds, the economic and legal hardships she faces in the aftermath, such as limited custody rights and financial insecurity, can leave her in an even worse situation. Number 8. Competing freely in sports. Saudi women's journey to compete freely in sports has been a long and complicated one. Before 2012, no woman from the kingdom had ever competed in the Olympics. But that changed when two brave women, Sarah Atter and Wojdan Shahir Khani, broke the barrier by competing in track and judo respectively at the London 2012 Olympics. It was a momentous occasion, but it didn't come without controversy. These athletes faced significant backlash back home, as conservative sectors of society opposed their participation. To comply with local customs, they were required to wear Sharia-compliant sportswear and be accompanied by male guardians. Despite this, their participation signaled a shift. Over time, Saudi Arabia has made some strides in women's sports, particularly under Vision 2030, which has made promoting women's involvement in various sectors, including sports, a priority. By 2023, there had been a notable increase in female participation in sports, with a 150% rise in the number of female athletes. Women are now competing in sports like football, fencing, boxing, and motor racing, fields that were once exclusively male. Progress has not only been seen in the number of athletes, but also in the support system around them. The number of female coaches has risen by 61%, and women now serve on the boards of Saudi sports federations. As of 2023, 23 national teams feature female athletes, a massive leap from when there were none just a few years ago. Still, women in sports face numerous limitations. Many schools for girls still don't offer physical education, and opportunities for professional training in the kingdom remain scarce. Female athletes often have to seek training abroad or use makeshift facilities at home. For instance, Raha Muharraq, the first Saudi woman to climb Mount Everest, shared that she had to train in the desert, filling a backpack with sand to simulate the conditions of her climb. Additionally, while some state schools have started incorporating physical education programs for girls, the vast majority still do not. The infrastructure for women's sports remains underdeveloped, with most of the 150 official sports clubs and national tournaments in the kingdom still catering exclusively to men. Nevertheless, Saudi women have earned around 100 medals in regional and international competitions, showing that progress, while slow, is steady. The road to competing freely in sports for Saudi women is still bumpy, but the dedication of trailblazers like Attar, Shahrkhani, and Moharek is inspiring a new generation of athletes. Number 7. Swimming in public. In Saudi Arabia, swimming in public remains a highly restricted activity for women due to the country's strict cultural norms and gender segregation laws. Women are not allowed to swim in public pools or beaches where men are present. Even with modest swimwear such as the burkini, public swimming is off limits. Instead, women have to rely on private pools, women-only gyms, or exclusive spas if they wish to swim. These private spaces provide some freedom, but the restrictions still limit women's access to recreational activities enjoyed by men in public settings. One option available for women who wish to swim is using private compounds, which are often rented for family gatherings. Some wealthier families also have built-in pools in their homes. There are women-only pools in luxury hotels and spas, but these come at a cost, both financially and in terms of access, as they are not widespread. Despite the restrictions, Saudi women are passionate about swimming. Over the years, there has been some progress, with more private facilities becoming available to cater specifically to women. For example, several hotels in Riyadh now offer women-only pool access, such as the Hyatt Place and the Intercontinental, which have set hours or entire days dedicated to female guests. These pools, however, are generally small and require a fee for usage. Cultural norms also dictate strict modesty requirements, even in private settings. Women are expected to wear full-body swimsuits that cover their arms and legs while swimming. This is part of the broader expectation for women in Saudi Arabia to maintain modesty in public and private recreational activities, further limiting their freedom compared to men. While reforms under Vision 2030 have brought changes to other areas of women's lives in Saudi Arabia, public swimming remains largely off-limits. Number 6. Trying on clothes in stores. Just over 10 years ago, Saudi women weren't even allowed to try on clothes in stores. This may seem surprising, but it's a telling reflection of the strict control women faced in public life. The idea of a woman changing behind a curtain was considered too provocative, leading to a complete ban. It wasn't until 2012, under King Abdullah's leadership, that this rule was lifted. While it might seem like a minor change, it highlights just how tightly regulated women's everyday activities were. King Abdullah's decision was a step forward in gender reforms, but it wasn't without its critics. Many of his reforms, including allowing women to work as cashiers and vote in local elections, were seen by some as more symbolic than truly transformative. Yet, they marked the beginning of a gradual shift in women's roles in Saudi Arabia. Before the change, the country's moral police, known as the Mutaween, held significant power to enforce these kinds of restrictions in stores and other public spaces. Their authority went beyond just monitoring attire. It extended to controlling much of how women could exist in public. While some areas of Saudi Arabia, like Riyadh, were known for being particularly strict, other cities like Jeddah were somewhat more relaxed. Even though some restrictions have been lifted, true freedom in public life for women remains a struggle. The reforms have offered more liberties, but they are still closely tied to the male guardianship system, which continues to limit women's independence in many aspects of life. Before we move on, here's today's subscriber's pick. Let's talk about something that has shaped daily life for Saudi women for decades: their clothing. For years, the abaya, a long black cloak, along with a face veil, was the required attire for Saudi women. This wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a rule strictly enforced by religious police, symbolizing the country's deeply conservative values. The abaya became a symbol of modesty, while anything considered too flashy or revealing could attract sharp criticism, or even worse, legal punishment. Makeup and brightly colored clothing were considered provocative, and women were often told to tone down their appearance. Fast forward to more recent times, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has introduced reforms that have loosened some of these restrictions. The black abaya is no longer mandatory, and many women in urban areas are now seen in colorful, open abayas. While it represents a small step forward, many women still choose the traditional look, either out of habit or personal choice. This can be seen in this image, where these women are walking confidently in their abayas, embracing both tradition and change. What do you think about the strict rules against women in Saudi Arabia? Let us know in the comments section below. Number 5. Opening a bank account. Opening a bank account may seem straightforward, but for Saudi women, it comes with significant hurdles, even today. Despite reforms, Saudi women still need permission from a male guardian to open a bank account. This is usually a father, husband, or even a son. While more women are working and starting businesses, these guardianship laws continue to create barriers, preventing true financial independence. Even if a woman earns her own income, she doesn't have full control over her finances without her guardian's consent. Before 2019, these restrictions were even more stringent, and women couldn't access many public services or even travel without a male guardian's approval. While recent reforms have loosened some of these restrictions, the guardianship system remains deeply entrenched. For example, even though women can now travel without permission if they are over 21, they still face other obstacles, such as needing guardian approval for important legal and financial decisions like opening bank accounts. In a country where women have only recently gained rights to drive and travel freely, the financial system remains one of the last strongholds of male control. Women who wish to conduct business or manage their finances still find themselves tethered to a system that treats them as minors. Even when official regulations no longer mandate guardian approval, many institutions still demand it, adding another layer of difficulty. The push for change is ongoing. Activists continue to demand that these laws be abolished, arguing that true progress won't be achieved until women are allowed to manage their finances independently. Number 4. Driving. For decades, women in Saudi Arabia were not allowed to drive, making it the only country in the world with such a ban. This restriction was finally lifted in June 2018, following years of activism and intense campaigns. One of the earliest protests occurred in 1990, when 47 women drove through the streets of Riyadh in defiance of the ban, leading to arrests. The movement continued to grow over the years, gaining international attention, especially through the efforts of activists like Manal al-Sharif, who filmed herself driving in 2011 and was arrested multiple times for her role in the campaign. Despite these efforts, it took decades before any real change was made. When the ban was lifted in 2018, it was seen as a monumental step forward for women's rights in Saudi Arabia. Many women celebrated by immediately taking to the streets, driving for the first time legally. This change wasn't just about driving. It represented a broader shift in societal norms and government policy. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2020 plan aimed to increase women's participation in the workforce, and granting them the right to drive was a key part of that vision. Prior to the ban being lifted, many women had to rely on expensive foreign chauffeurs, making daily life and employment opportunities more difficult. The lifting of the driving ban opened up new economic opportunities. Women could now take on jobs that required mobility, such as driving for ride-hailing services like Uber and Careem. The car market also saw a boost, with vehicle sales projected to grow by 9% annually until 2025, as more women became drivers. This was a significant shift in a society where public mobility had been largely restricted for women. However, the change didn't come without challenges. Road safety became a concern as women entered traffic systems known for reckless driving. Saudi Arabia had one of the highest traffic fatality rates globally, with nearly half of road deaths involving people under 30 years old. Some experts speculated that female drivers might bring positive changes to driving habits, as studies suggested women tended to drive more cautiously than men in Middle Eastern countries. Activists who campaigned for the right to drive, like Lujan al-Hathlul, were arrested and continued to face restrictions, even after the ban was lifted. The right to drive has given Saudi women more freedom, but it is just one step on a long road toward true equality. Number 3. Interacting with men. For Saudi women, interacting with men who aren't family members is still a sensitive and highly regulated issue. For decades, the country has enforced strict gender segregation, making it illegal for unrelated men and women to mix freely in public. Violations of these rules, known as kilwa, can result in harsh punishments such as public lashings, imprisonment, or fines. Historically, the belief that keeping men and women apart helps preserve morality has deeply shaped Saudi laws and culture. Gender segregation is present in almost every public space, including schools, restaurants, and workplaces. For example, women working in lingerie shops were initially required to be separated from male customers by walls as a way to enforce these norms. In 2008, a shocking case highlighted how strictly these rules could be enforced. A 75-year-old woman named Kamisa Mohammed Sawadi was sentenced to 40 lashes and deportation for allowing a man to deliver bread to her home. This incident shows how even the most mundane interactions between men and women could result in severe consequences. Though some reforms have been introduced in recent years, they remain limited. In 2019, the government announced that restaurants and cafes would no longer be legally required to have separate entrances for men and women. However, many establishments still choose to maintain this practice, and in many areas of the country, public spaces remain strictly segregated. Even though there has been a gradual shift in public opinion, with a survey showing that 65% of Saudis now support men and women freely mixing in public, these changes have not yet fully taken root in law. Women's groups continue to push for greater freedoms, but legal challenges persist, with gender mixing still largely prohibited. Interestingly, social media has provided a virtual space for Saudi men and women to interact. Although online interactions are offering Saudi youth more freedom to communicate, it still doesn't replace face-to-face conversations. In cities like Riyadh and Jeddah, there are signs of progress. Some rules are starting to relax, but the limitations on women interacting with men are still a major part of daily life. Violating these rules can lead to serious consequences, and while change is happening, it's slow and complicated. True freedom in this area will take time and further reforms. Number 2. Wearing makeup and certain clothing. In Saudi Arabia, the way women dress and wear makeup is more than just a matter of personal choice. It's shaped by cultural and religious rules that have been in place for decades. Traditionally, women were expected to wear the abaya, a long black cloak that covers most of the body, and a headscarf. This dress code was enforced by religious police, and even wearing makeup or slightly revealing clothing could lead to social criticism, or in some cases, punishment. The abaya is still common today, but things have started to change. In recent years, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has hinted that women no longer need to wear the black abaya, as long as their clothing is decent and respectful. While this marked a shift, no official law was passed to end the abaya requirement. So, although more colorful and open abayas are seen in cities like Riyadh and Jeddah, the cultural expectation of modesty remains strong. Makeup, too, has long been viewed as a controversial subject in Saudi Arabia. Heavy makeup can draw unwanted attention, particularly in more conservative parts of the country. For many, it's seen as going against the ideals of modesty that are closely tied to religious beliefs. However, Just like with clothing, there's more freedom in bigger cities, where women are experimenting with bold looks and challenging old norms. In the past, women could face severe consequences for not adhering to the dress code. For example, the now diminished religious police could issue fines or even arrest women for wearing clothes deemed too revealing. While the religious police no longer hold the same power, social pressure to conform remains a significant influence on how women present themselves. Despite these reforms, modest dress is still the norm, especially in smaller towns and rural areas. There is also an interesting contrast between how locals and foreign women are treated. Foreign women, especially tourists, have more flexibility in what they wear. While they aren't required to wear an abaya or headscarf, they are still expected to dress modestly, meaning no revealing clothes, tight jeans, or low-cut tops. Many tourists opt for loose dresses or long cardigans to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Number 1. Voting. In 2015, Saudi women experienced a moment that had once seemed impossible. They were allowed to vote and run for office in municipal elections for the very first time. This wasn't just a step forward. It was a powerful shift in a country where women's roles had been tightly controlled for decades. The right to vote might seem basic elsewhere, but in Saudi Arabia, it marked a historic milestone. After years of being excluded from public life, women finally had a chance to make their voices heard. The numbers, however, told a different story. Around 130,000 women registered to vote, compared to over 1.35 million men. These figures reflect the challenges women faced, from bureaucratic hurdles to the lack of registration centers specifically for women. Many found it difficult to register, as they needed to prove their residency. But most homes were under the names of male family members. For single, divorced, or elderly women, proving their address was even more complex. Despite this, the significance of their participation was undeniable. 20 women won seats on municipal councils out of the 2,100 available positions, showing that even in a deeply conservative society, women could make their mark. One of the most notable winners was Salma bint Hizab al-Otaibi, the first woman ever to be elected to a public office in Saudi Arabia. Her election victory, though at a local level, sent a powerful message. Women could and should be part of public life. But the road to this achievement was full of obstacles. Not only was voter registration difficult, but running for office presented its own unique challenges. Female candidates were prohibited from directly addressing male voters, which meant they had to campaign through male representatives or use online platforms. These limitations put women at a significant disadvantage in the campaign process. Despite the odds, nearly 1,000 women registered as candidates, with some ultimately being disqualified for unclear reasons. While this was a monumental step, the limitations were clear. Municipal elections handle only local issues, such as roads and public services. The real political power, positions that influence national policies, remains off-limits to women in Saudi Arabia. The country's higher levels of governance are still male-dominated, with women unable to vote or run for those offices. The 2015 municipal elections were undoubtedly a milestone for Saudi women, but they were just one step in a long journey toward full political participation. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.